Well, welcome everybody today to today's Lunch with the Local. And today I'd like to welcome today's guest, Mayor Michael Hewitson, the Mayor of Unley. Welcome today, Michael.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Good to be here.
Great. Just to start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which each of us meet today. For me, this is the Gawler people of the Adelaide Plains, and I pay my respect to elders past and present. I'll be asking a couple of questions to Michael, and I'm very interested to hear the responses. But by all means, please use the chat feature today if you'd like to also ask some questions to the Mayor, and so we can actually cover as many different topics as possible. To quickly introduce Mayor Michael Hewitson, Michael is the Mayor of the City of Unley, a role he's had since 2018, and before then a ward councillor for 12 years. Michael graduated as a pilot officer with the RAF and also in microbiology before pursuing a career in education at some very senior levels. And Michael was appointed by the federal government to be a board member for ACARA, the Australian Board of Education that has a significant role in curriculum development that we'll hear about. And in 2013, Michael was made a member of the Order of Australia for services to education, the Anglican Church and the community of Unley, which is many, many achievements. So welcome, Michael. And maybe I can start by asking, pilot studies in microbiology, and then you become a maths teacher. What's the story there?
Well, I went to a university and look, I'm from a family that everybody went to university. It was just normal. And it wasn't that common back then. I think it was only about 7% of the population actually went to university. But my grandmother had done medicine, and my uncle had done economics, and my dad had gone off to the war and started an economics degree, and then went into arts and then theology, and did both of those at Adelaide University. And so fundamentally I was interested in science, but I wanted to be a teacher and the Federal Minister of Education and Science, actually. I was
humble goals.
I liked relationship with people. I wanted a people's job. Anyway, I was doing actually mathematics, physics, chemistry, psychology I did on the side. I did psychology too at university. And I was recruited by the microbiology department at the end of second year, because I did P&I to physical and organic chemistry too, which had about a 25% pass rate and did rather well with it. And so I was recruited by the microbiology department along with 7 others, to join the microbiology department, because Adelaide University was one of 2 places in the world that was actually doing genetic engineering. It was cutting from DNA and splicing it into then Escherichia coli. Sorry. It's an organism that's common in waste products from the human gut as well as animals and not. It's a very common rod-shaped blue-staining bacteria, and being so common and useful, it was the early days, so it was cutting edge. And they found that the zoology and botany students didn't understand the chemistry, didn't understand the mathematics, and couldn't handle electron microscopes and do all the technology stuff, because microbiology was changing from a descriptive classificatory tool into a science of both the mathematics, basic biochemistry, chemistry, and physics were all totally relevant to the microbiology of today. So they recruited 8 of us, and then I was intending only to do a BSc. And then they asked me, along with 3 others, to do an honours degree and do postgraduate studies. And so I went back to the housemaster at school and said, look, this doesn't really help you in teaching. And he said, look, Michael, they've asked you to do it because there are very few in education that at that stage had done anything post normal degree. So that's how I got into microbiology, and I did biochemistry. And then I did the honours, And then I applied for the least popular school in the state education. Well, actually, I didn't. The head of St Peter's College contacted me and asked me to do a 2-year job there, send me to leading schools overseas to broaden my education, to come back and be a master, or if I would come back to be master at St Peter's. And I had the weekend to think it over. I was unbonded. I paid my own way through university for first year with fruit picking and then bus conducting. And then it was the area of the Commonwealth Scholarship. If you did well enough at first year university, you got awarded a Commonwealth Scholarship. And so that funded my university for second, third and onwards. So I wasn't bound to the department. And Jim Giles, that some people will know, he became the Deputy Director General as area director, knew my father. Anyhow, he caught up with me and said, Michael, if you want to broaden your education, you won't go to Saints, you'll go to the least popular school in the Education Department of South Australia. That'll broaden your horizons. So I applied to go to the least, not very sensible career-wise, but nevertheless, I applied to go to the least popular school of the state system, and the school I was sent to, well, actually, I applied to go to the worst school, and I'm using careful euphemisms here, and the school they chose to send me to, which if members who were on the staff would be appalled to think maybe it was regarded as the worst school. But anyway, they sent me to Air High School, Whyalla, and the school in Whyalla was in the western suburbs at that stage. Whyalla was booming with shipyards, had Aboriginals, had migrants, of Spanish and Scottish migrants, and the West. And then Whyalla High School and St John's were the two inner established schools. And so this school was up to year 10 at the time. And so I went out there, and I was asked by the senior staff to help them, because neither of them had science degrees, to help them fill in the orders for senior secondary physics, chemistry and biology. This is a beginner teacher, hadn't started, and I was organising the curriculum all three. Anyway,
it's a very long journey.
Yeah, because I had a microbiology degree, they thought must be biology, you see. And my biology was actually extremely thin, because it was limited to the physics, chemistry, and microbiology. So I soon broadened my knowledge of botany and zoology, having taught year 12 and thoroughly enjoyed it up there. And then I was asked to take up no, it wasn't. Albie Jones, who's the Director General, wrote me a letter saying, Dear Michael, I haven't received your copy of your application yet. Where is it? I'm your referee for the Director of the Salisbury Education Centre. And so I was also president of the Teachers Union up there, and then was promoted to the Stuart High, was another high school open further west, and was asked and did the science senior job there for a while. And then when I was there, I was written to by Albie Jones saying where my application was. So I duly applied.
This is fascinating. There's so much here on education. I just fear that we won't get a chance to talk about local government as well.
Well, you asked how I got involved in education. I always intended to be a teacher, involved in education, and the pilot officer, Vietnam War. The reason I did that was because I wanted to know if I was a conscientious objector or whether I was a pacifist or not, trying to work out my values and ethics. And the Air Force officer training was not exempt from national service. The Army one was. And if you want to, before you reject something, you should do your homework and know all about it, right? And so I did the training. And then at the end of the first year of training as an Air Force officer, and because of my technical background, I was being trained to run a Canberra bomber repair maintenance shed. And at the end of that first year of that training, they decided that the Air Force decided that they wanted to keep these people, and therefore they shouldn't be able to be coerced into the army for Vietnam. So I became exempt from the Navals, and then they didn't have to face that moral dilemma. I didn't think I was a pacifist, because I actually think what the values that we have in Australia, we're standing up for. And we shouldn't just hand them over to anybody who thinks they can just send an army in here and take us over and establish their own system.
Gosh, thank you. Fascinating stuff. And then local government. So how did you find yourself in local government then?
Well, I moved back into Unley, and because I was principal and CEO of Trinity College up at Gawler. For the people who don't know, it's a school of just about 4,000, had vast waiting lists, ran as a state school terms, but it was a public school, non-selective entry. We made sure that money wasn't, we charged the fees to allow families to choose the school. And so if you're on school card, over 30% of the students were two-generation employed, doubly unemployed school card. The school was located in the worst performing area of the whole of Australia academically, and in the Elizabeth Salisbury areas, North Salisbury, North Elizabeth areas, were the worst socioeconomic target scores in Australia. And so this was a school to offer that community a different kind of education to what was being available out there, and we were overrun. We had no money. We were running at 65% of the recurrent income of a state school, and that includes parental fees plus state subsidies and federal government subsidies, payments. And we had parent-built log cabins, land guaranteed by the Anglican Church, so if it had fallen over, the Anglican Church had all the debts and no power if it succeeded. Well, it was done as a mission, it was a school owned by that local community. In exchange, the Anglican Church, the Archbishop was a visitor. In the same way, the archbishops are visitors to Oxford and Cambridge universities in England. It was that tradition, that structure. And the Anglican Church had 3 appointments to a council of 12, one of which was an accountant, because there were no, to watch the finances. Another one was a lawyer. Neither had lived here. They were Adelaide based, because the talent in that school community wasn't there, you can imagine. And the other one was just an appointment of the Archbishop, so that he had somebody on the board, because he's going to be the visitor. At least he had an idea of what was going on. And then the rest of them were all local appointments, the majority of which are straight out from a democratic vote of the parents and later old scholars of the region were the voting body. And so they chose the board. And I worked for them in the independent school model. I've been solely responsible for staff, students and curriculum. And the board was responsible for making sure that the next generation were well being looked after. In other words, 25 years' time. And the vision and generational change and the long-term planning. And then they had the responsibility to review the performance headmaster and either to reappoint or not reappoint.
So tell me about the local government perspective then, those wealth of experiences.
Okay.
What did that bring to local government for you?
Oh, well, it's actually very interesting. It also brought to the National Board of Education because I had to be responsible for the finance, the gathering, the expenditure in a way that state school principals are protected from. The department does all that work. You're on your own. If the school gone bankrupt, everybody in the school would have to close. And in fact, I finished up helping a number of bankrupt schools to change and evolve and set up 8 other schools too. So I was fairly involved in giving choice to parents in areas that had no choice. So in local government, I told the board, I didn't want to go out to Trinity, by the way. It was a school that was about to close. It tried to open. It had apparently 29 kids. They're doing everything wrong. They were teaching grade 7s, grade 4 maths because the 2 teachers were unemployed teachers, newly trained. None of them had taught primary school. You know, it was parish hall stuff. You know, desperation out that area. And the parents would walk into classrooms and the school's going to. So it was a poison chalice. So I didn't want. Anyhow, they managed to persuade me to take on the leadership of the school. And I said, look, if this works, I will finish at such and such a date, which happened to be 2002. And because that's a good length and to have a leader. And then after that, you need to appoint somebody else. And so I moved to Unley from Gawler, so I couldn't interfere with my successors. And then was approached by quite a range of people to run for Mayor of Unley. And I had no interest in local. Port Adelaide councillor was involved in the St Nicholas Port Adelaide school, which should have got up and had vast waiting lists too. And an empty school site, totally unused at West Lakes. And it was the politics of education that stopped that community getting a school that they wanted for their own kids. But it succeeded getting other schools up elsewhere. So when I went down there, I was asked Sunday lunch, 2 of my kids with their families, told them the story, and said, look, I said I wasn't interested. And then I got the lectures I gave them because they all came through Trinity College. And I was teaching them that they had a responsibility to run Australia, you know, and take leadership and things. And I was explaining to them how they could take over both the Liberal and Labor Party branches just by organising 20 of them to join either one of the 2 major parties, and how to and I used to have the politicians come into year 12, and we had a couple of hundred year 12s, and I said, you've got to persuade them to join your party. None of this polite, neutral politics. This should be with passion. Anyway, my kids had come through a system where the local MPs, both Labor and Liberal from the area, because we're on the fault line, the school was on the fault line between country Liberal seat and heavily most secure Labor seats. And I got on superbly with the people from both parties and were invited to all their inside functions. And Lee Stevens, for example, she was, I think, Minister for Health at the time. And I got her to actually, Martin Evans was a great friend of the school. He was the one-time Mayor of Elizabeth. They'd come out and with passion talk about why they should join. After I told them off after their first week attempt, the next year they came back with the right sort of stuff. And so my kids are growing up that you should get involved and be committed to help build community. And being head at Trinity, I was in neither, you know, no part. I needed to work with whoever was in government, right? And I couldn't, wasn't appropriate for me to be a member of either party. And so when I was asked to run for mayor, they gave me the lectures I gave them. And so I decided, well, I'm pretty safe here. There's good candidates in the Unley ward after the lectures, after a few wines, and about 3:30 in the afternoon. I said, all right, you lot, I'll throw my hat in the ring for the Unley ward. And I thought I was safe. There was one guy there who was head of little athletics, Unley Primary School president, running, and a long-term councillor running. And I thought, well, I'll throw my hat in. Nobody will know me. Well, what I discovered after I was elected, and I got home from sport, and I had payback. Glenn and Chris, my son and son-in-law, as payback, I got them to be scrutineers on the Saturday, right? And scrutineering went up to 6 o'clock at night. I got back at 4:30, and they were having a glass of red wine with my wife. I said, you lazy loafers, you're meant to be in there counting the votes. And they said, oh, Dad, you've won, top the polls, and your preferences have been distributed. And I said, come on, you haven't. I didn't believe them. Anyway, it was true. And what I hadn't taken into account, that Adelaide's a small place. Anybody living in Unley, if they knew anybody from out north, their kids would have gone to Trinity. And they gave a phone call, and I was told that they told them, vote for this guy. So that's how I got involved in, not very glorious, is it?
No,
Anyway,
it's
that's the truth.
because,
That's the truth.
yeah.
And then once you get started, let me tell you, I couldn't care less about that first election. When I re-ran, I was absolutely passionately involved because my son was heading up, his doctorate was in water engineering and distribution systems and using genetic algorithms. And he was heading up planning of Adelaide's water supply. He'd been overseas and they'd come back to have kids and the support of grandparents, you know. And so he came with a sheet of paper and said, Dad, here's how you can I put 50-metre pressure pumps at Keswick and the end of George Street. And you could water the bottom third of Unley without any pumping. With the gap water, we got surplus and a back of an envelope. So I took the scheme. We could water the whole of Unley, I said. We could, use the creek waters because I knew that more water ran out of sea from our creeks and reservoirs across Adelaide than we pump from the Murray and get from our reservoirs put together. And I knew that the water going out to sea was killing our seagrass because of its nutrient rich, killing our seagrass, destroying our fisheries, and at the same time we complain about the eastern states pumping water out of the Murray when we send our river creek waters straight out to sea. So I found that morally objectionable. So
and that is one of the strategies you're looking at now, isn't it? With your
no, we've done it. No, well, hang on. No, we've been. Hey, but this is 12 years ago. By one vote, I got it up that we do the study. You had to go around. I had the opposition of the mayor, the opposition of the staff. This too big, too unrealistic, and I managed to corral 6 others to vote 7-6 to get this study done. And then the election was on because it takes, if you understand, the water was going to be too salty. And so I had all the analysis there. I showed that the gap water was less salty than the River Murray water that we were using in January, right? Because what happens, the River Murray gets low, we pump it out of the River Murray and we get a higher salt burn. I can give you all the measurements in parts per million, but I've learned not to throw around numbers and figures with people because they glaze over. But the bottom line is, and so we then drew, so I was running to get this study done and I had stakes. Anyway, I was re-elected and then by one vote got the study vote up to actually do it. And we got the report that Ridge Park was fractured. It won't work, you won't get any water there. That's the Glen Osmond Creek, Brown Hill Creek, sure thing at the orphanage. And so I had to persuade them to spend $150,000 to drill at Ridge Park. I said, in science, the world that exists is not necessarily the world that we see. You've got to actually explore it and do the experiment and test it. So we drilled Ridge Park, a geyser of water shot 50 feet into the air. It was an underground moraine of rock basin. There was water moved less than 1 millimetre per annum. And so it was all the hills water pressure up behind. And so, and guess what happened? The orphanage, which was a sure thing, because that was going to be like Salisbury, aquifer sequestration, where you had this groundwater basin to put it into. Well, orphanage had fractured rocks, it wouldn't work. So then we crossed our fingers and drilled in Haywood Park on Brown Hill Creek, and that worked. We had enough water from that to supply Mitcham as well, and Mitcham Council weren't interested. And so we've supplied ourselves, and the water is 2/3 the cost. This is amortised over 10 years. We've been doing it for about 8 years now. The cost of water across the city is 2/3 the cost of mains water, and we're not pumping it out of the Murray, and it's higher quality. Pure spring water and pure creek water from both.
So is this the right place?
The whole City Purple Park network.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a question from Margaret and Alan. they've asked, do you think that local government's your place, or is state and federal politics, which is the most effective place to be?
Okay. I said to you beforehand that what was my ambition? My ambition was to, frankly, to be a Federal Minister of Education and Science. My interest in politics were probably, straight out that time, were Gordon Barton's Australia Party, which was into consulting, the whole membership had a body, etc. We did very well. I organised the teachers' vote in Gawler, for the teachers' politics, versus federal government, and we got a huge vote in Gawler, an area for that, and overall the state, I think it just missed out on the Senate seat. Then locally, we did pretty well, but it was a party. You really have to be involved in the major parties to really get change at a national level, and I was a member of neither. And the Australia Party turned into the Australian Democrats, I think, and and the history of that was, kind of closed shop.
Yes.
But I married a wife who didn't like politics.
Did she know what she was getting?
And she was very good. I mean, we hosted all the barbecues and stuff at our home for both the Teachers Federation, for the federal Senate seat, and for the other. But no, I wasn't allowed to stand or be involved, and so I really had to. It was really not a viable thing for me to become Minister of Education and Science, or to do the sort of things to get into that position.
Yeah.
And so it was quite extraordinary that my father insisted I finish a book I was writing on how our children learn. I've done 3 books, but the most recent one was published, and it was a minor bestseller. It got, 10th, then 7th, 9th, and then a month later, 8th, then 6th, then 5th, and then you know what happened, 6th then. But the education book, it was regarded as, I wrote it as a page turner, because I was wanting to tell real stories about what is the problems with Australian education and what to do about it. And I got invited, and that's how that book apparently was, it had been read by politicians of all colours, and the name was put forward, and that's how I was nominated to the board of ACARA as an independent member and independent thinker. And I gave them hell, and I was absolutely astonished that I was reappointed for yet another term.
Yeah, and I'm interested in the ACARA. In the couple of minutes we've got remaining, with COVID-19, we've had schools closing, we've had online learning.
Okay, that's interesting. As a microbiologist, I've been absolutely appalled at the. It's plain obvious that it's a cold virus. Okay, COVID, it's the common cold. The chance of us getting a decent vaccine, it will be revolutionary. Okay, so you'd have to say, I'm expecting that we will get better treatments for those who get sick, and at the very best, I think we'll get a partial cure like the flu ones, where we get some things. And so it's basically, we're going to have to develop either herd immunity or we get the vaccine. Now, the vaccine's not impossible. It's worthwhile chasing. It's just that we've been chasing without quite the current determination for about 60 years, and with all the modern science, haven't cracked any cures for the common cold. So that's a risk.
I was interested also about the education dimension. COVID's the thing that's changed the way that schools have been educating.
Kids should be back at school. Absolutely. The immunity passing, nowhere in the world is transmission from child to child. The children are better off at school. the countries which didn't have children at school, kids are great, maybe spreaders and carriers with their parents, etc. To have them, when schools shut down, the Unley shopping centre was crowded with children. You know, in terms of a microbiological solution, and where our kids better interacting with a teacher or a computer or Zoom and all these things. Kids learn from adults far more than any formal lesson. Parents are teaching their kids lessons that they probably think their kids aren't learning, but they're learning them from their parents. And so kids watch and learn by what is in the heart, and they catch that, not just what you tell them they should know, but also what you think is important. They're making decisions about their life choice based on the things that you think are important, and the teacher's the same. So that face-to-face personal relationships are pretty vital.
That's wonderful, and that's a fantastic point to end today. So thank you very much, Michael.
Great pleasure.
I've enjoyed the many dimensions and the directions we've taken today. It's been quite fascinating, and congratulations.
Can I put a plug in for the Unley Council? We're coming in for a tree strategy where trees are being lost 31%. Used to have, we're down to 20, probably 5%. We're losing 2% of our trees per annum. Private lands where we're losing them. We're putting up a vote. We've had an overwhelming response in favour of using rates and finance and incentives on private property to drive change of behaviour. So we'll see what happens at the council meeting. I'm hoping we'll give trees real value. Walking and cycling in COVID times boomed. We are a couple of years into doing a walking cycling plan and network. Future transport systems, gophers, e-scooters, and an uninvented machine, which I'm very tempted to invent, which doesn't exist at the moment, an individual personal transport operator to run not on roads, not necessarily on roads, but on bikeways, 4 metre type things, 2 metres each side. So passionate about a whole lot of things, and also passionate about making business thrive and expand and people having a go. Thank you for joining me, and
thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.